When Britain declared war against Germany in August 1914, Australia, as a dominion of the British Empire, was automatically also at war. While thousands rushed to volunteer and fight in Europe, most of the men accepted into the Australian Imperial Force in August 1914 were sent first to Egypt. After months of training near Cairo, the Australians departed by ship for the Gallipoli Peninsula, along with troops from New Zealand, Britain and France. On the 25th of April 1915, they landed at what became known as Anzac Cove, where they established a tenuous foothold on the steep slopes above the beach. By the end of the first day, 16,000 Australian men had landed, with many more to come. Although the landing could be considered a success, it had cost them dearly, with more than 600 men killed in action and many more wounded in the first 5 days alone. The early days of the Gallipoli campaign saw vicious fighting as the Allies tried to break through Turkish lines, while the Turks tried to drive the Allied troops off the peninsula. Attempts on both sides ended in failure, and the ensuing stalemate continued for months. In August, another attempt was made to force a way across the peninsula by landing a new British force north of Anzac Cove at Suvla Bay. Anzac attacks at places like The Neck, Lone Pine and Chinook Barriere caused thousands of casualties among the attackers, with only the objectives at Lone Pine being successfully captured and held. The most successful operation of the campaign would be the large-scale evacuation of troops on the 19th and 20th of December. As a result of a carefully planned deception operation, the Turks were unaware of the withdrawal and inflicted few, if any, casualties on the withdrawing forces. After returning to Egypt, the Australian Imperial Force was reorganised and expanded from 2 to 5 infantry divisions, which were transferred to France in 1916. Almost all of Australia's mounted forces in the light horse divisions remained in Egypt to fight the Turks threatening the Suez Canal. After victory at Romani in August 1916, the light horse pushed forward into Turkish territory. In 1917, as part of the Desert Column, commanded by Australian Lieutenant General Sir Harry Chevelle, the Australians entered Palestine and in 1918 advanced into Jordan and Syria. The campaign ended on the 31st of October 1918, a few weeks after the capture of Damascus. By the time the Australian infantry divisions arrived on the Western Front in 1916, it had long been in a stalemate, with the opposing armies facing each other from trench systems that extended across Belgium and northeast France, all the way from the English Channel to the Swiss border. The development of machine guns and artillery presented a new type of brutal combat for Australian troops. In 1916, at Fromelles, Australian forces suffered over 5,500 casualties in just 24 hours. By the end of the year, about 40,000 Australians had been killed or wounded on the Western Front, in battles at Pozières and Mouquet Farm, and later around Flers. In 1917, a further 76,000 Australians became casualties in battles such as Bullecourt, Messines, and the 4-month campaign around Ypres, known as the Battle of Passchendaele. In March 1918, the German army launched a massive spring offensive, hoping for a decisive victory before the industrial strength of the United States could be fully mobilised in support of the Allies. The Germans initially met with great success, but eventually lost momentum and were stopped by a series of desperate defensive measures carried out by the Allies. On the 8th of August 1918, the British launched their great offensive of the year at the Battle of Amiens, when the Australian and Canadian Corps spearheaded a massive attack that combined infantry, artillery, tanks and aircraft to push the German line back several kilometres in one day. This unprecedented success allowed for the slow but inexorable advance that continued to push the Germans out of France. In early October, after the fighting at Montbretagne, the Australian divisions withdrew from the front for rest and refitting. They were preparing to return to the fighting when Germany signed the armistice on the 11th of November, 1918. In 1918, Sergeant Noel Clarence, who had served in the Australian infantry since Gallipoli, wrote to his family to say he was still well. He finished his letter by writing, "Meanwhile, the conflict rages in intensity and fury, leaving in its wake desolation and misery, broken men, and broken hearts, for those who will never return to reap the reward of their labour. War is a terrible thing, and only those who actually participate in its hellish work can fully comprehend what it means. It has been driven home to me." The war was finally over, but the fledgling nation of Australia would remain changed forever.